Welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. It's the Christmas edition and they've tinselled up the studio. They've given me the baubles and the tree. I feel like I'm in Santa's grotto. And it's the Northern Business Podcast almost as usual. Each week we've been talking this year to people active in business and the economy about the big issues driving growth in the north of England. We're sponsored by Virtue Motors, which is one of the largest UK motor retailers, and you can check out its website at virtuemotors.com. I'm Graham Robb, owner of Recognition PR. We help scores of businesses promote their products and services, and some are featured on our podcasts. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. In the studio today, a little later in the programme, we have Margaret Bradshaw, Chief Buttoneer at Red Button Marketing. And down the line, to start the programme, we have two people from Make UK in different capacities. Andy Butt, who is Head of Business Development and Commercial for Reliance Precision, and James Brougham, Senior Economist at Make UK. Now, Andy, as well as being in charge of business development at Reliance Precision, which is in West Yorkshire, is also the chair of Make UK Defence, which is a separate division of Make UK. But we're going to start with you, James. You're the Chief Senior Economist at Make UK. And this week, before Christmas, we've had a few bits of economic data. House prices, we've had a little bit of a fall in house prices announced. Down by 1.2% in the 12 months to October. But in the northeast of England, they actually went up a bit, which was a surprise. But every other region of the country, including Yorkshire and the northwest, they went down. But then the other big bit of data was inflation, which surprised City analysts because it came in at 3.9% rather than just over 4%. So there's a bit of background for the economy this week. You're an economist. You look at these things. Were any of these indicators a surprise to you?
Well, good evening. And it's rare for an economist to want to gloat, because our own data in a report we published on Monday might suggest that we were slightly off the mark last quarter. But it's something that we at the Analyst HQ at Make UK have been expecting. We've definitely been on the downside for inflation. So we think this, particularly through our lens for the manufacturing economy, we see these elevated base rates really driving down activity in the sector. It's what's really scuppered our forecast for the third and fourth quarter of this year, and is what has generated such a pedestrian forecast for 2024, which is currently standing at 0.1% in terms of value growth within the manufacturing sector for 2024.
Right.
And saying that already in 2023 isn't a very Merry Christmas, I'm aware. But a lot of this we're putting down to that expected sustained high base rate environment. Now, indeed, as you mentioned, the data's coming out that the inflation's dropping faster than expected. And so indeed, the likelihood of a base rate adjustment is being brought forwards. However, we all know that when that does come, it's going to be very, very, very subtle and delicate.
And of course, there's a sort of a common sense view among economists and people who are active in business that if you've got inflation under control and the Bank of England's job is to control inflation, then they logically should ease up on the interest rates. But then you've got the narrative from the Bank of England say, well, yes, I know it's going very well, but really our target's 2% and we're not going to go off the pedal until 2% is achieved. So there's a bit of a dual narrative going on from equally credible and authoritative sources.
Exactly. What they'll really be watching is wage changes, especially over the coming months. One of the bank's biggest fears, the Monetary Policy Committee, when they really think about what they're going to do with the rate, they're going to think about how much people are getting paid in the economy, right? And so they're worried about that oh so overused term, baking in inflation, as understandably people will have suffered, in real terms in many cases, effectively wage cuts over the year with the inflation rate over the past 12 to 18 months. And so to see what they should do with rates, they'll be really looking at as we move into the first half of 2024, has that cycle of wage increases, that those extraordinary wage increases come to a close. If so, that might signal a time where it might be safe for them to start bringing down the rate. If not, they might hazard a little longer still.
It is interesting, isn't it, James, that regardless of what the bank is saying about rates are going to stay this high for longer, the long-term market for interest rates, if you were going to take out a mortgage now over 2 years or over 5 years, those rates have come down. It's as though the market is speaking more than the analysts.
True. There's two things happening there. One of them is, which is particularly when we talk about rates, we're often referring to the mortgage market activity. volumes have been down so awfully over the past year that banks are actually now competing for business by placing rates sometimes below the base rate. For exactly these reasons, that the mortgage business is seeing such a cut in activity compared to what was maybe pre-pandemic, to talk of such a long ago thing. Really, what we're seeing is that the economy, the sector, and indeed the bank itself, pretty much every player and every agent in this economy is aware that rates are going to go one way. It's a question of when. It will be a very, very surprising cold day where we see rates climb back up again from the position we're in. And because of that, that's why the long-term financial products and the banks are able to offer these sorts of guarantees over the long term, because everyone is pretty much 99% sure it's coming down. It's going to come way down. The question is this going to happen within a year or over the next 5? That's what's unknown, and that's what's causing a little bit of uncertainty around when we can expect to get back to higher levels of economic activity within the sector.
Right at the beginning of these comments, you said that wage growth, growth and the inflation in the wage market is one of the key determinants. It's what the Bank of England is watching. One man's wage rise is another man's job loss, as the old 1970s slogan went. But it's difficult to control wage growth when there's a tight labour market. And when it comes to your members, many of which require skills, that tight labour market ain't abating, is it?
That's exactly right. And something that's somewhat, I think it's fair to say at this point, become systemic since the pandemic is the average level of demand for workers in the sector. And we'll just look at vacancy rates within the manufacturing sector in the UK to proxy that. Now, they're currently at around 69, 70,000, but that doesn't mean much to them. So you look at it as a ratio. So per 100 employed, it's currently at 2.9 jobs vacant for every 100 workers employed in the UK's manufacturing sector. Now, that long run average, if we look back pre-2021 or right the way back 30 years, is 1.8. It peaked at 4 in the post-pandemic. But what it means now is we're really in a position where it's effectively the demand for labor within the sector is 50% higher than that long run average. And that doesn't seem to be abating. So, the questions of the missing million and all those sorts of conversations about unemployment hasn't really gone up, but those economically inactive, which are very hard to track, have gone up. And what this has caused is the sector is in a sort of new normal in terms of the level of demand for labor, and where it's finding it short. The market's not supplying that sufficient amount of labor, which from a separate angle is also driving up price competition in the labor market in terms of wages. Okay,
well, we've gone into some detail now, which I'm very welcome, but I just want to tell our audience that I mentioned the key economic data that was published this week from the government, but that your report also must count as key economic data because it's your Q4 report, Manufacturing Outlook. If you want to see it online, I'm holding up for our viewers a picture of it. There's PDF available. I've looked at some of the key findings. I just pull out. It isn't all doom and gloom. I've just highlighted some just so we can get to it. Export orders growth. Now, that might be because we've got a weak domestic market, but export orders were on the way up. And there is an expectation among your members that order books will grow.
Rightly so, and well observed. And it's something that we've struggled with last quarter. So as part of this data, we take a very candid view. So we have our own forecast, which we calculate here at Make UK HQ, and then but also we elicit data from the sector itself and don't touch it about future quarter intentions. And so I think the most important finding about not being too doom and gloom is that the confidence metric remains roundly unfussed despite some short-term negativity in some metrics such as orders in the short term. So what this shows us is that there's certainly not a tidal wave of fear coming in the first quarter, second quarter of the year. What there has been is some short-term movements over the past quarter that have been unexpected. And indeed, one of those is output has significantly come up above what we had expected in the third quarter. A lot of this is to do with surprise supply chain easements, allowing a lot of value to be unlocked out of warehouses. But of course, that's a short-term thing, and indeed, that's reflected in the confidence figure, which hasn't necessarily jumped up significantly, but also hasn't come down. And UK manufacturers' business confidence is firmly in positive territory. Now, it hasn't really improved on last quarter, but it is at approximately 6.5, which is our diffusion index, and that's above 5 is positive. And so we're going into the next year with a roundly positive confidence figure, despite an output forecast that is pretty much flat.
So we'll just grab that bit of information. So a bit of data that's above 5 is positive.
Correct. In this index, the way we measure
in your
it.
index. Now, I'm going to flash up on the screen. You've done this nationally. You've broken it down into governmental regions. And we look at the northern regions because it's a northern business podcast. And I just quickly canter through the northern regions. In the northeast of England, it's a positive. It's 6.8. It's up as far as output. It's up as far as employment. It's down a bit on investment in the northeast. In Yorkshire and Humberside, it's up on all indices. It's up on all output, it's up on employment, and it's up on investment. Not so good in the northwest. The May UK Manufacturers Index suggests down as far as output, down on employment, down on investment, but confidence still high. 6.2% confidence in the northwest, 6.9% in Yorkshire, and 6.8% in the northeast. Now, is this typical of the country, or can I, we always like to say on the Northern Business Podcast, can we say the north of England is an outlier? Is it driving this?
Well, I think it's important to observe, as you've correctly detailed, that both the northeast and Yorkshire and Humberside have above average manufacturing economy confidence there, with the northwest slightly beneath the average, but still within positivity at 6.2, just beneath the UK average at 6.5. So what we're seeing here, particularly with the improvement in output and employment, is also a little bit due to poor figures last quarter. So it's up compared to last quarter, but what we saw last quarter was effectively a hiring freeze on aggregate across the country. So our employment metric data suggested that there was very little employment growth. And so looking at this quarter, we have seen a softening in that position. The businesses were in a bit of a scared position last quarter, particularly around liquidity and cash flow moving into Q4. So this created a bit of a hiring freeze activity. So employment performance has been up across this quarter, and we're seeing that in those northern regions as well. Output as well, as I mentioned at the start, has jumped up after serious flattening last quarter. So that's reflected across those northern areas as well. As you mentioned, investment is down, apart from in the Yorkshire and the Humberside. The investment is really the victim at the minute of that heightened base rate environment, right? Money's expensive. Money's a lot more expensive than it has been, or businesses have been used to, perhaps for too long, been used to very, very cheap money. And so now the risk of, the requirement to make sure that you get those returns on investment when you're making that multi-million-pound investment is ever so much more risky at the moment, especially given the uncertainty, as we've talked about, on how long that sustained base rate might go on for.
Well, James, I'm going to ask you to pause for a moment because I want to segue into one of your members and ask him a little bit about his business, and that we might come back to you to close this session right at the end. But do listen in to Andrew Butt. Andrew is one of the people who are running Precision engineering company, and you're based in Yorkshire, and it's Reliance Precision. Before we go into the specific area of Make UK you're involved with, in general, because your business is involved in lots of sectors, I should stress, what did you make of those Yorkshire bits of data that outputs up, employment's up, and investment's up? Is that reflected in your own firm, Andrew?
I think it is, yes. I think as a business, we're in a particularly fortunate position that we invest quite heavily in an in-house accredited training scheme for apprentices. So at any one point in time, 10% of the entire workforce is going through that apprenticeship program. So for us, we've got this in-house ability to feed in good quality resource to support our business. But overall, the order books are good. Next year is looking positive. And especially in the defence industry, noting that defence is one of several industries we supply into, those order books are also looking particularly healthy.
And you're a manufacturer of precision components, so it is at the it's not metal bashing in your zone, but it is manufacturing at a high an intense end when it comes to skills. Yep. And so on. So the need for those training. Just quickly canter through the kind of sectors that your business supplies.
Yeah, sure. So about a third of our output is for defence across a range of products. About 40% of the business is in analytical devices and medical instruments. and then the remainder is a standard products business.
Okay.
But within the world of machine components, we try to push the boundaries of what we think is technically achievable. So taking on board James's point about cash flow and the cost of capital at the moment, it's something certainly we look at. We invest very heavily, not just into the people, but also into the equipment in our kind of facilities. And deciding when to spend that £1 million check on a new piece of equipment is a key decision.
Okay, now I'm going to ask you to put a different hat on now, because in your non-business role, you are chairman of the body from Make UK that deals with defence. It's called Make UK Defence. It's a specific group. Tell us about that grouping.
So Make UK Defence is a national organisation, and we represent the interests of the SME community. So that's the small to medium enterprise businesses throughout the UK. So we do activities like pitching at government or the MOD for policy change. So that could be anything from the prompt payment code to ensure that the supply chain is paid within 30 days or less. It could be pitching at the government to try and define what ESG requirements are rather than providing generic guidance. And we also dovetail into the parent organisation, Make UK.
Okay, and we'll pick up onto at least one of those points in a minute and what you're talking to the government about. But I suppose you focus on SMEs because clearly the UK has a defence industry. It's making aircraft and ships and so on, and they require a supply chain. If you're building a ship, you're going to need fabricated materials, you're going to need instrumentation, you're going to need everything from food supplies to uniforms. So there's a large element of supply chain needed to defend the country.
There is, and actually one of the interesting trends we're seeing at the moment, and at least it's beginning to pick up pace, is a move towards either reshoring back to the UK or nearshoring from product in the Far East towards Europe. And I think a lot of that's being driven by the war in Ukraine and the need for greater sovereignty and control and therefore resilience around that supply chain.
I think the phrase I've heard is sovereign capability. We don't want to be reliant on, not necessarily hostile foreign states, but even, for argument's sake, France or Germany or Holland. We want to be able to actually have the capacity to do it ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's very valid. And if you look at some of the issues that have occurred to global supply chains over the last few years, there was the container shortage, which caused global disruption. There was the chip shortage, the electronic chip shortage that affected almost every manufacturing business. We're seeing droughts. I think it's in the Suez Canal at the moment that's preventing the normal flow of traffic through that trade route. And then you've got hostilities in the Middle East with pirates targeting freight vessels. So all these big global supply chains are put at risk or stress when unexpected issues and events occur. And for something like defence, it's critical that you've got the ability to keep supporting your troops in any particular campaign.
So the sovereign capability is one element of you lobbying. You were talking just then about Ukraine, and there's been some, I suppose, from the point of view of people like myself who support the Ukrainian people's fight against Putin, some disappointments in international policy. The point of view that I may hold, and maybe you hold, isn't necessarily shared even by a lot of people in democratic countries. And if you look at the UN, quite a large chunk of the UN actually sides with Russia on this.
Yeah, there's the disappointing is that the politics is still playing its way out. So not to put too fine a point on it, but prosperity is only possible with security. So I'm shamelessly ripping that quote from Sir Michael Fallon. But the point that he made at the time, and the point I'll make here, is even in times of economic pressure, like we've seen over the past few years with high inflation and high cost of living, you still need the defence budget to be able to secure your own borders. And I think we've been fortunate as a Western country for not having had direct threats against our country for at least the last 15, 20 years. Ukraine has certainly started bringing that a little bit closer to home. But the need for increased defence spending is still definitely there.
And it hasn't been possible this week for the European community to get its aid package through. And it's also not been possible for the US Congress to get its aid package through. And Britain is almost an outlier in this respect because it's continuing to help Ukraine. The other two big economic powers will presumably sort it out, but it probably causing a lot of consternation among our Ukrainian allies.
I'm sure it is, and ultimately any delay by the West in providing the funds and the arms and equipment needed to help support the war in Ukraine is going to be emboldening Russia with its forces. We think generally that Putin's probably playing a bit of a waiting game to see what happens in the American elections. But any wavering by Western countries, casting aside what's happening in America, and any wavering to spend the money that we've all committed to support this long-term war in Ukraine is advantageous to Putin. And to put some of those figures in perspective, so that the NATO minimum commitment is 2% of GDP, or at least that's the target. The UK spends about 2.2% of GDP on defence, and that puts us sixth highest. So that straight away tells you the vast majority of NATO members are quite some way off spending the minimum commitment. And the US, for reference, spends about 3.6%. So, the difference overall, yes, the US is a massive country, and therefore at 3.6%, the amount it's generating is huge. But actually, when you look at our 2.2, it's some way off where I think we should be.
Before the podcast, it's 2.29 now, so it's nearly 2.3. But there is a government policy, is there? To get it up, I think it's 2.5 the government want. And I've had on this podcast lots of different organisations. I had nursery schools on a few months ago. We've had care home companies on, and they all want government to spend money. Do you think 2.5% is going to take bread out of the mouths of those sectors, or is it something that it is legitimate for defence supply chain to ask for?
I'm not under any illusion that there's a magic money tree and that you can shake it and suddenly there's more. The money will end up coming from somewhere. And I won't try and do James's job and answer where he thinks that money is best coming from, or even Rishi Sunak's job. But I kind of go back to the point of what happens if the war in Ukraine doesn't go successfully for the Ukrainians. Whether there's a stalemate and then Russia re-engages, or whether Russia manages to take further land in the near term, there's a general belief that this isn't the end of it. And that Putin will continue targeting Eastern European countries in order to rebuild the former USSR. And that's hugely destabilizing for the region. And if you just want to look at the monetary aspect of it, there's a direct cost of that. You only need to look at the cost of our electricity, gas, food, fertilizer and heating bills over the past few years to know that there's been a direct result to our pockets. So my argument is not rob Peter to pay Paul. My argument is if you don't do what's needed, we're going to end up paying anyway.
I've got one last question, and I'll flip back to James to finish this segment, and that is about ESG. Now, this is with your Make UK Defence hat on. You were saying that you often want to raise the issue of financial organisations requiring certain levels of environmental, social and governance, and sometimes ethics come into this, and the question about whether the armaments industry or the defence sector is an ethical investment. Now, I'm sure there'll be viewers that take a different view to me. My own view is it's perfectly ethical to support sending missiles to support families that have been enduring an invasion from a hostile state. But that's only my view. When it comes down to other views being perpetrated upon you and your sector, rather, by banks where you need funding from. That's a different kettle of fish, isn't it?
It is. It's one of the hot topics at the moment. We've had members of Make UK Defence have their funding, their bank funding completely withdrawn at very short notice. And you can imagine the kind of disruption that presents to those companies. There are other high street banks that have put limits on the amount of revenue customers that they will support can gain from the defence industry. And again, that's limiting, in some instances, that's limiting the business's ability to grow and develop. Whilst others, especially some of the new startup banks, don't have those kind of policies. So I think we're seeing a twofold issue. One, that there seems to be a negative view about manufacturing and the defence industry generally, and two, such large variance between any particular bank within that banking sector.
All right. Well, look, thank you very much indeed. It was great to hear from you, Andy. I'm going to flip back to James and just ask him to summarise where he thinks we are. At this point on ESG and the governance of way money can be paid by banks, generally, and not just banks, other financial institutions, pension funds and so on, it is becoming a debatable question, isn't it?
Yes. And I think if I was to wrap up, I would say that Despite perhaps not very exciting headline metric forecasting, I mentioned output and orders for and indeed general overall growth for the sector next year. I think what has been mentioned, which is the silver lining, which is in those investments, and particularly those energy efficiency investments, sustainability investments, do continue to be made, perhaps driven initially by, we were talking about the war in Ukraine and the subsequent huge uplift in energy prices that we saw. But still to this day, those energy efficiency investments are trickling through the sector. And of course, while in the short term that is being driven by a cost basis, by the sector trying rapidly to get its costs down, the long-term benefit for the sector of effectively having this transformative moment of a sudden increase in energy efficiency over the past year, and which will continue into the next year, bodes well for the long term, particularly in terms of sustainability for the sector. So in terms of those investments getting a better footing, so despite 2024, perhaps in the numbers game, not looking particularly exciting, that doesn't mean to say there's not plenty of activity setting the sector setting itself up for prosperity in the long run in the 2025 and into the future.
Well, James, Andrew, thank you for coming on. Do come back. It's always great to have Make UK on the programme. A double bubble today, and have a great new year, and let's see how it's going in the next quarter and see what your next report says. James, thank you. James Andrew, Make UK. We're going to round up our last programme of 2023 with a short interview now with Margaret Bradshaw. She's based in North East England, and she runs a small business called Red Button Marketing and Training, which has devised a new kind of software, digital edge software it's called. Margaret, you're pioneering, you're innovating, it's only a small business. Tell us about the software.
Yeah, okay. So the software is actually, it's My Marketing Button is the name of the software. And we're really excited that we've just recently welcomed our first agency ambassador, and they are Digital Edge.
Right, okay.
So Digital,
I got
yeah,
the
no, that's okay. Digital Edge are actually an incredible agency. They're based in Aycliffe, run by Ian Proctor and Graham. Not Graham Proctor, by the way. I just don't know his surname. But no, they're a great team. And the software, My Marketing Button, what that is it's an online framework that gives SMEs, so startups, micro, small companies, a really great way to plan their marketing tasks. Because I think if we just kind of take a step back and ask ourselves, it's really good to ask in a business this question: what is marketing? It is a business process, but trying to get sort of the same page thinking around what it actually is can be challenging. So we decided we would like to make it visible.
So you've broken it down on the screen for people.
Yeah, so it's great, and it's really motivational. I mean, this is also at the heart of everything we do, through whether it's and we've got like that blended approach in our businesses. So we've got the training element, so we train in the process, and then the technology, the software acts as a kind of that task manager for people to use after training, or they can just go on and use the software.
Now, the kind of people that would be responsive to this training is, I suppose, people who are newly into marketing posts.
Well, yeah, and actually, interesting, we've just done a really big project in the Northeast and been involved with a number of companies, and the interesting different roles that we've seen on the training. So it's people new to marketing roles, or it's people involved in a business who are looking to have more responsibility to get involved in the marketing process. But it's also business owners who actually would just really quite like a way to see this amazing process that kind of acts as a connector. Because we talk a lot about operations, we talk a lot about sales, and I think we all get that. But trying to define what marketing actually is and where it sits in the business can get a bit blurry at times. So we kind of wanted to call it out and make it clear.
So let's get this right for the finish of the interview. It's called My Marketing Button. And your business is Red Button Marketing. Press
Training.
Button.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're training people in marketing and helping businesses to achieve marketing solutions.
Absolutely. What we're training in this marketing performance framework. We're training in what this framework looks like and how people can use it as a way to embed a marketing culture, a way to visualize what the marketing process looks like, because ultimately it's for people involved, whether they're internal or the external agencies, but everyone involved on that company's marketing process. So we've made it visible so people can see where they can impact. So our training is very much centered around what that visible process looks like, but how people can use their knowledge, their expertise, their insights in such a way to connect, and I'm using my hands here, but to connect and like stitch together that solid marketing function.
She is. For people listening on the podcast, she's using her hands.
I'm stitching.
Listen, Margaret, it's been great having you on the last
Thank you so
program.
much. Honestly, it's been lovely. And you.
Product, and thank you for joining.
Good tree, by the way, Graham. Thank you so much.
Very good. If you'd like to join us as a guest in 2024 on the Northern Business Podcast, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks to my podcast producer, Harry Sinclair, and my technical operator, Robin Campbell. And join us next time on the Northern Business Podcast, which is in the first Wednesday of January. Never miss an episode. Like, rate, and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Happy New Year.